before you listen to the podcast interview with crime writer Denzil Meyrick, I'd like to tell you to keep listening after the conversation has finished, because there will be just a clip from the audiobook narrated by Tom Turner of Denzil Meyrick's The Christmas Stocking Murders, which we've been kindly given by the publishers Bantam. But first, here's Denzil. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined once again by writer Denzil Meyrick to talk about the latest Inspector Frank Grasby novel, The Christmas Stocking Murders, published by Bantam. Hello, Denzil.
Hello, Alistair. It's lovely to speak to you again.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to, because before we talk about this latest novel, about this time last year, we spoke about the first Frank Grasby novel, Murder at Holly House. And I wondered how it was received. What was your feedback on it?
It was very well received, actually, and it was my fastest selling book to date.
Wow.
And that was in its hardback form. But of course, it's now, I'm now with Transworld Penguin Random House, so that accounts for that probably. However, yeah, it was very well received by most people. There was the odd daily fan who complained that I should never have not stopped writing daily, but I haven't stopped writing daily. There's one out in the summer.
Oh,
So that's,
well, that answers one of my questions. That was
oh,
good.
I do beg your pardon.
No, that's okay. It just is a matter of interest, because I said it's published by Bantam, but Bantam's an imprint of Penguin and Transworld. Is that right?
Yeah, Bantam's the Transworld hardback imprint. So if you're with them, that's who publishes your hard. It's a very complex situation.
It's a complicated world, the publishing world, definitely.
It most certainly is.
And with the Christmas Stocking Murders, were you excited to be back in this world of Inspector Grasby?
Now, let me point out to you just immediately that I never get excited about anything. I'm
I
notoriously,
forgot who I was talking to.
I'm notoriously unexcited or unexcitable. I love writing Frank Grasby. It just bounds off the pen, if you like. He's a very easy character to write, and it's a joy writing something set in a simpler time when you don't have to worry about CCTV cameras and mobile phones and all that kind of stuff you have to in contemporary fiction. Yeah, and it's comedic, as you know. It's nice to write something that isn't visceral and blood and thunder as much, though there are passages in the book that are, quite visceral, but
Yes,
in a nice, cozy way.
yeah, that's the thing. We talked last year about this the idea of cozy crime, but how
Mm.
yours had a kind of dark twists all the way through it, and it's the same this time around.
Yeah.
So I think, people think, well, I'm going to go cozy. It's still very much a Denzil Meyrick novel.
Yeah. I think that I remember writing the first ever Sandy Hoynes novella, which
Hmm.
I know you enjoyed.
Yeah.
And just at the start of the pandemic, and I get so many nice messages about that and how it cheered people up and everything. So, and I've had the same messages about Grasby, and that makes me feel good. And I think that adds to the enjoyment of writing it as well, because you know that people aren't just sitting, dreading to turn the page in case there's something they don't fancy on it. Because we must remember that a lot of people, even reading about violence and such like, don't particularly like it.
Yeah.
And then this move to a more cozy, for want of a better term, uh, side of things is good for them, and they enjoy it more. And so I think there's a place for everybody.
Absolutely. And also, when we talk about the time later on, because there's something specific I want to ask you, but just from what you're saying, is also setting it in the past takes away that kind of immediacy as well. People are thinking, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that could happen to me if I'm not careful, which might happen in contemporary crime fiction. When you suddenly take it back to the 50s, as you have, that's not so
Mm.
much of a worry.
Yeah, I think there is a vicarious concern that some people have regarding contemporary fiction. If you write something that is really quite violent or affects people's psyche, that they're fearful that it might happen to themselves. And I've had messages about that as well from the daily novels.
Yeah.
Not very many, but one or two. Um, and so, yeah, as you say, when it happens in the 1950s, it's at a remove, and therefore it doesn't have that effect in certain individuals.
And can you give us a kind of brief synopsis of the Christmas stocking murders? I'm asking because I don't want to give away any spoilers. So if you give a synopsis of it, then we'll avoid that.
It's a taut comedic yarn. I just think it's a cozy thriller.
Yeah.
So Frank Grasby and his boss, Arthur Juggers, are sent to a small village on the Yorkshire, North Yorkshire coast, where a man, a fisherman, was found dead, strangled by a stocking. And stockings start appearing on the beach and things like that. And they obviously make the quick conclusion that there's something suspicious about stockings in this place and what's going on. And thereafter, they are thrown into uh, a really exciting and thrilling um, scenario whereby they have to catch people who are smuggling stockings from Europe into the United Kingdom. Because let's remember, rationing was still on the go back then, and
Yeah.
indeed certain, um, uh, goods protection laws that encouraged people to buy British rather than buy from America or Europe or everywhere else. And so that was people wanted stockings, they couldn't really get very good stockings here, or they weren't, very, very numerous and numerously available. Um, and I think that's the core of the novel. It's this idea that you can't get what you want because either it's not available or it's banned by trade tariffs.
Yeah.
I remember reading about the Beatles in the 50s when they wanted Fender guitars, and of course they weren't going to get Fender guitars because America was certain American goods were banned from Britain, sailing Britain because of trade tariffs, and that's kind of what brought this idea to mind. And then I studied the whole stalking thing, and one of the biggest smuggling cases in the 50s was of stockings from Europe into Yorkshire. So after that, it was easy peasy.
I love the idea of you researching stockings. That's
I
interesting.
do a lot of that, Alistair, actually. I don't often let people know.
Well, it's good that you're honest on this
Oh,
podcast.
yes. Honesty
Um,
is a good thing.
and it opens with a prologue and also a note from Frank Grasby from the 70s. And were those kind of devices, if you like, were they there from the start to kind of set the scene?
Yeah, Frank's writing it in a kind of memorial way. It's his memoirs he's writing. And so we're ploughing through with him as he looks back in his career from the 19, I think he's in the mid 1970s, writing
Yeah.
about all this time that he's had as a police officer and as a soldier as well, because I do intend to go back into the Second World War at some point to his service in the army, which I think will be quite interesting as well. So it's going to be a movable feast. At the moment, we're progressing steadily forward in time in the 50s, but we're moving going to move backwards as well at some point. And so yeah, so you're experiencing the case as he saw it at the time
Yeah.
with it. So he has no foreknowledge at the point of you reading his commentary on what's happening. He's written it from his notes as he took as a young copper
Yeah.
when this was all going on for real.
That's interesting. One that you're going to move backwards as well as forwards.
Oh
I
yeah,
guess I just assumed that it was going to be, I was wondering if you would maybe even, once you've taken them through the 50s, you could take them through the 60s, of course. But I hadn't even considered that what's really interesting, going back to the idea of when it's set, is that everyone in it is kind of defined by the Second World War still in different ways. But
yes.
is that a fair thing to say?
I think I didn't experience the 1950s. I'm much, much too young. But my dear mother used to tell me, she was a great storyteller and relater of things that had happened in her lifetime. And so I know that the people in Campbellton were very impacted by what had happened in the war and all the things that had gone on. And of course, Campbellton at the time was a huge base for the
Yeah,
British
cool.
Navy, the UK, the Royal Navy. And so I think it's obvious that rationing was still on the go, goods were short, food was still short. People were still going on national service as they did for quite a time afterwards. So the war cast a lang, lang shadow, I think, to be fair. And um, I think we all think about the 50s as a very nostalgic period in the world's, in this country's history. But when you look back at it and study it a wee bit, it's quite obvious it was quite hard at points as well. Um, you know, I
Yeah,
asked Douglas Skelton and he told me all about it.
absolutely. I must ask him next time I see him.
He'll not remember.
But it is, everyone is, I guess in some ways traumatized, but at least affected by what they went through in the Second World War. And that's interesting in itself because it kind of, it's not like a blanket effect. It's each individual, certainly in the novel, has including Frank himself.
Yeah, I think it's all very well setting out on a comedic adventure, and this is in parts, but it's a bit of a curate's egg when it comes to that because Frank reflects on what happens to him and has happened to him during the war and how it's changed him. And I presume that it changed most people, whether they be civilians who were left at home or people who went to serve in the war itself, whether it be in the Army, Navy, or RAF, or whatever it was they did. And I think the Second World War left an indelible mark on lots of people. I think every war does. It's an unimaginable horror, and we're going through it all again in certain parts of the world, and more people's lives are going to be stained and by
Yeah.
the cruelty of war. And so, I always like to mix things up, as I've always done in the daily books as well. So there's bathos and pathos as well as the humour and the gags and everything else. And it helps make not only Grasby but others around him more rounded characters.
Mhm.
And that's the way I always want to portray my characters.
And the action takes place in it's Uthli. Is that the way you say it? Uthli Bay?
I'm saying Uffley Bay.
Uthli Bay. Yeah. Okay.
Uffley
Which
Bay.
is
It might be in the colloquial it'll be Uffley Bay.
Uthli Bay. Yeah. I think when you
Yeah.
say it with that accent, I can see that now. And it's a seaside place, which did make me think of your Kinloch
Hmm.
novellas in particular, but also Daly. Is there something about coastal villages that you enjoy using as settings?
Eh, I think there probably is because I grew up in a small coastal town.
Yeah.
And so when but the previous book wasn't set in the coast, as you know, and the next one in the series won't be set in the coast. But it's easier for me to conjure up an image of Uffley Bay during the 50s because Campbelltown in the 60s wasn't much different than it was in the 50s. And I
Right.
can remember that as a child from the mid 50, from mid 60s, three or four, five, six, up until the 1970s. I remember Campbellton quite well. And so it's easier to pick up wee bits in detail about fishing boats and the feel of the place, because I think fishing communities, wherever they are, have an innate similarity. I think even in different countries, there's that kind of comradeship of the sea that continues, and fishermen are and always have been at risk every time they take to the sea. And so there's that camaraderie that's created and it spreads itself through the community. So you can add that feeling to the whole description of the place and the people as well.
And these are, I mean, that's, fishing in itself is an ancient industry, probably what you're probably the oldest, or at least one of the oldest. So there's a timelessness, I guess, about the industry around such places.
Fishing and prostitution, that's what they say, isn't it? That's
I,
the oldest businesses.
I read
Yeah.
yeah, because I read a book recently and it opened on a whaling boat out of Shetland, but it
Uh-huh.
was set in the 50s. Like this is, but it just seemed to me, oh, that must be,
Yeah.
hundreds of years ago almost, because it hadn't changed in all that time, the basics of it anyway.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it could easily be. I mean, they've found artifacts around the Scottish coast, around every coast, that fishing back 4, 5, 6,000 years ago, and especially in places like the North Channel back at home and on the East Coast, on the Yorkshire coast as well, because these fishing communities have been around for a long, 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 long time, long before the world was structured the way it is. and there is an impact in a community that is a fishing community. They know, I think you know the value of life in
Hmm.
a fishing community, um, because one of the friends I went to school with, a guy called Billy Martindale, died in the Antares,
Hmm.
the fishing boat that was dragged down by the Navy submarine. And a lovely lad he was, and a good bloke. And he was gone. And I remember it was back in the early 90s. I remember the funerals of these guys in Campbelltown, and there
Yeah,
was a pall cast over the place. I mean, there was, the town was just, definitely hit by what had happened, and the grief, which was clearly felt by the family and friends, spread right throughout the community, and that's the same everywhere you go.
yeah. And that's why when murder comes to Uthley Bay, it has such an impact.
Yeah, yeah, I think a small village, um, everyone knows everybody else. Rumor and gossip is rife. I think there's a piece of knowledge of what's been going on amongst some of the inhabitants. So they have an idea that something's not right, but they're not telling the police everything either,
Yeah.
as you'll know from the book.
Hmm.
So it's interesting to write about it from that way. It means that Frank's and Juggers is bounding in there and you thinking it's going to be one thing and reasonably easy to solve, and then discovering that it's not that at all and it's going to be a bit dangerous.
What I really liked about it, one of the things I really liked about it was that you kind of give small hints right from the beginning that all is not what it seems. And
Yeah, I
that's
think
the
yeah.
reaction of other characters, and you think, well, that the whole truth's not coming out here, which I think's really
Mm.
interesting to uncover it.
I think it's important to do that, especially if you're in the first person, Alistair,
Hmm.
because you're limited in your descriptive agility when you're only seeing it through the eyes of one character. And it's important that in Frank Grasby's interactions with other characters, you can build up an idea that something's maybe not right, and you don't rely on his responses, and what he tells the reader. You can tell by conversations and actions that perhaps there's something different. Whereas if it was just straightforwardly, you had to take your information from Frank, then you perhaps wouldn't get that nuance.
And I think it's interesting how Frank's character kind of unfolds in his relationship with others. His father's one, for instance, you get to see, it was in the previous novel, but you get to get a bit more of what their, you know,
Mm.
tortured dynamic is pretty much. But also with Superintendent Jaggers, who's I think is just a fantastic creation. Is that right? Do you think it's, Frank, he's different with different people depending who they are?
Yeah, as you say, obviously he has a long and tortured relationship with his dear father, the Reverend Grasby, who is one of life's misanthropes, in the extreme, even though he's now going out with a woman who's wedded to the occult. However, yeah, I think that I think everyone's like that, though. One, I mean, I think you'll have
Yes,
a different relationship with people that you know, and even in a working environment, in your family environment. There's some of my family that I can't stand, and there's others I think are quite good. So Frank's the same. I think he is a very. I, I think he's been led because the upbringing he had with his father. It's led him to have a very jaundiced view of the world,
yeah,
and a jaundiced view of certain people, and it takes a long time for Frank to gain confidence in somebody, and he does in this book, as you know, and somebody very special to him.
yeah.
So I think with Frank, he's a bit standoffish. He uses his humor and his offhand comments as a kind of carapace for to protect him from the life he's led with his father, which hasn't been easy.
And can we talk a bit about Superintendent Jaggers? In terms of creating this over the top character, how
Mm.
does it come to you fully formed, or how does it work?
I think Juggers was also easier
Juggers,
to
sorry,
write.
yeah.
Yeah,
Juggers.
Juggers. Yeah, he was easy to write because um, he's over the top, as you say. He's larger than life, like Grasby himself, and you have a very easily established idea of what he's like. He's big in terms of being rotund. He's got a big personality. You can easily see him bossing a division of impressionable young constables and more experienced inspectors and things like Grasby. I think he's one of these people. Yorkshire has a propensity to produce people like this. You just need to listen to Geoffrey Boycott or the late, I mean, Fred Truman, some of
Yeah,
the great cricketers the county's produced, to know that there's a blunt kind of realism to the way they like to present themselves. And it's quite interesting actually because it comes from their Viking ancestry.
right.
And I think that it was the Yorkshire was basically along delineated by the Danelaw, um, and that there's a difference in Yorkshire than there is to the rest of England. That really blunt, outspoken manner, and Juggers has all that.
Does, but there's also as their relationship develops, it becomes quite a warm one, I think.
Yeah, oh, I think he's a caring soul. I think he
Yeah,
hides like a lot of people of that persuasion. These kind of blunt people are quite caring and emotional under the surface. And back in those days, as Grasby was in the Second World War, Juggers served in the First World War,
yeah,
which you'll learn in this book. And so, he's been through the mill as well. And he started off life after the army in the co-op Fleshings, which was a really interesting place to work. I remember there was a co-op Fleshings in Campbelltown when I was a wee boy,
right.
and it always used to send the shivers through me every time we passed the co-op Fleshings. There was something visceral about it. So, but Juggers is a nice. I think he's a really nice guy, and underneath, and he fears for Frank Grasby because he knows he's quite can be quite hapless. Yet he respects his um the way he can has a sort of inspirational work as a detective. He realizes that Grasby has something, and that's why he perseveres with him, even though as he describes in the book Grasby when he starts off his report write. I'm currently report writing, which is Grasby for. I've had a lot to drink the night before, and I'm suffering from a bloody awful hangover.
There's lots of lovely kind of interactions between the two of them. But for instance, um, Grasby keeps getting caught in what Juggers assumes is flagrante with the opposite sex when he's like, no, no, it's quite
Yes,
innocent. But he thinks
yeah,
he builds a picture of him as some kind of terrible ladies man.
yeah,
And similarly, Juggers, when it comes to it, can look after himself still, but yet has difficulty picking something up from the floor because there's not these lovely little almost
yeah.
kind of concern between them and slight misunderstandings about who they actually are.
My favorite line in the whole book is, and when I wrote it, I actually laughed myself. Yeah, blow the goose out with bloody trousers did that. And, you know, yeah, they're very much, you know, different sides of the same coin, Chuggers and Grasby. And I think you'll find that as time goes by, they're a real double act, a bit like Daly and Scott, to be honest.
Oh yeah, I hadn't made that connection, but yes, I get that. Absolutely. And there's lots of lovely local Yorkshire sayings and colloquialisms that are throughout, which helps set
Yeah.
the pace as well.
Yeah, again, learned from my mother because my mother was born in Hull and grew up in Yorkshire until she was 12 years old when they came back to Kintyre because of the war. And, we went to visit Hull every year religiously and as an adult, I've been to Yorkshire a lot since I was older. Um, and so you pick up on these things, and I'm very fond of Yorkshire. I could easily see myself living there if things were different.
And talking about mother's sayings, you often get Frank thinking back to his own mother and some of the kind of wisdom that she taught him. She's Scottish and, has that kind of wisdom to
Yeah.
depart as well.
I think his mother's played a huge part in his life because his mother was a kind of foil for his father, who was, depressive and rather austere as a parent. and his mother's a warm, kind individual who's willing to indulge her son and pass on, her knowledge of the world and everything like that. And she's been and of course she dies before we meet Frank.
Yeah,
And I think she's been a really big part of his life. But you'll get to meet her when we go back to the Second World War, which may be a different sub-series. I mean, these might not be the Christmas novels, but they
yeah.
might be at other times in the year.
Oh, I can't wait to meet her, I have to say.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
when you write your novels, or any of them, I guess, do you know where events are heading?
As I always say to everybody that asks me that question, I'm not a planner and a plotter.
Yeah,
You get guys that will have post-it notes right round the room, whiteboards, no, endless notebooks with the plot planned out in minutiae in every detail. I'm not like that. I know where I want the beginning, the middle, and the end, roughly, although the end sometimes changes during the writing. And that's how I proceed. And everything else that happens every time I sit down to write, that's what I think up when I'm doing it. And nobody's wrong or right in this scenario.
no.
But if I don't know what's going to happen, then the reader won't know what's going to happen either. If that's my kind of leitmotif.
Well, a follow on from that is, do you know who is going to be involved? Because this novel has returning characters. I won't say any more than that. But were you aware from the beginning that there are certain people that you might want to bring back?
Not from the very beginning, because when I wrote Grasby, the original Grasby, it's about 2 years ago now, and I moved publisher in that time, and I sat down and discussed it with Finn Cotton, who's my wonderful editor at Transworld.
Mhm.
And he said there's some really outstanding characters here. It'd be a shame to ditch them just because we've changed location. And the characters that you see in this book will no doubt appear in future books as well, as they did in the first book.
Right.
So yeah, I think we can cut some characters with us, three, four, five characters with us throughout, and then build on that kind of character bank
I
until I
think
start killing them off.
I think it's one of the really a warming. What's the word I'm looking for? It's one of the things that if you're returning in a series, you often want to meet the same people again and again and catch up with them and say, "Oh, what's happened." Not just to Frank, but maybe what's happening with his relationship with his dad, what's happening with other relationships,
Yeah,
and those kind of things. I think that's part of the appeal.
there's definitely a soap operatic quality to it, as there is with Daily.
Yeah,
People want to know don't kill off so and so. Oh, what's happened to such and such?
yeah,
And it adds, especially in a book like this, it's nice to sit down with the nostalgia and familiar characters and to know a bit about them before you start reading the book.
yeah. And can you say what's next for Frank Grasby?
Frank Grasby, I think it's called The Mistletoe Wedding Murders,
Hmm.
is already up for pre-order and it will be out next November. And Frank is attending his father's wedding to Hetty Gaunt at an old friend's estate in the middle of North Yorkshire. And Frank is to go and be the dutiful son. But as you can expect, things don't go according to plan.
Fantastic. So we'll probably have similar conversation this time next year and catch up with Frank and find out exactly what's
If
going on.
if we're spared, as my mother used to say.
Absolutely. It's a long time to wait, Denzel. Have you ever thought of considering an Easter special to tide us over?
Well, you see now, yeah, I'm sort of 2 books ahead of everybody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
So I've already written the daily that's coming out in the summer, this summer coming, in 2025, and I'm just about to embark on writing the next Grasby. So it's a kind of production line of books.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as you're enjoying your spring break, I'm busy writing a Christmas novel,
Getting in the mood.
and yeah, and as you're in your summer holidays, I'm busy writing something else. I think that you know publishing has changed in the fact that IT advances have made it much easier to write, as opposed to the old typewriter and paper days.
Hmm.
So it's easier to write, it's easier to edit, it's easier to send manuscripts back and forth to your publisher, etc., etc., etc. Um, but you know, I'll never write more than 2 books a year,
Yeah.
and probably less than 2 books a year eventually.
Hmm.
Daily has been on the back burner for by the time he comes out, for 2 years.
Yeah.
This will be the first novel for 2 years when it arrives out, and because I want to explore other avenues like Grasby,
Hmm.
like The Estate, which we talked about as well last year, and has since come out, and so and there's other things I want to do. I do have a notion to write a cowboy novel.
Fantastic.
Yeah, be prepared for this.
Ah. And we also spoke last year about DCI Daily making it to TV. Is there any news on that?
Oh, well, it's just that the television is exceptionally complicated, as I've discovered, and things move exceedingly slow, but it's all going well and interestingly, and I think you'll eventually
Yeah.
enjoy the its outpouring.
Yeah.
I'm hell talking of um contractual measures that I can't say much about it,
Well,
Alistair, but yes, it's the television's going through a complete change, as you know.
yeah.
And 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the streamers were king, and we never thought there'd be anything else. The streamers would eventually take over television. But of course, there's been a consolidation of streaming companies now, and funding has not been as easy as they thought it would be. The cost of living crisis has impacted them as well. And so even since we began this odyssey, the landscape has somewhat changed in as far as the companies who will eventually produce the show is concerned. And we've had to ride the punches. We've had COVID, we've had an actor's strike,
Well,
we've had a writer's strike, we've had you name it. Omicron came and hit us just as we thought we were going to get it going again. So it's been rather torturous. But we'll get there eventually. Don't worry.
no, I can't wait to see them when they come out. And I also can't wait to find out what happens to Frank next. I guess I'm just going to have to wait a year. Denzil, thank you so much
Yeah,
as ever for taking the time to talk to me. I really love these novels. You know, I like
I'm
your
so
previous
pleased.
work as well. So, yeah, all the best with it.
It's really nice that you like them, and so many people have written to me to say they like them, and I think it's down to that less, as I've said before, that less visceral kind of presentation. And you know you're going to sit down and come away when you put the book down, you're not going to feel worried or anxious or, start reliving something you've read. And there's a point to that. Alan Massey in The Scotsman kindly said last weekend that not many novels made him laugh out loud these days, but this one did time and time and
Yeah,
again. And he thought that Grasby was going to be like Christie every Christmas,
yeah.
a sort of must read, and that was very kind of him, and I hope that is the case.
I agree. There are scenes that are just laugh out loud funny. They're really complex, which people, when you hear the word cozy crime, they might not. There are, as you say, there's highs and lows and laughs, but also you've got the difficult backgrounds,
Mm.
murder as well. So there's so much going on.
The
Already, I'm thinking them, as Christmas must reads. So I agree with this.
yeah, I know what you mean about cozy crime. The publishing industry loves
An easy,
pigeonholing things.
yeah, they love an easy title, don't they?
And I can understand that from a sales perspective that, it's something if something, if you like this, you'll love that.
Yeah.
And as we all know, it's not never as simple as that, but it's the only way they can do it, and you can't blame them for it.
No.
And I would say that Crosby's a sort of cozy-ish um, kind of thriller,
Yeah.
sort of.
Yeah. Denzil, thanks very much, and all the best with this book and in the future.
Alistair, an absolute pleasure. I hope to see you next year.
Absolutely. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. And now, as promised, here is an extract from the audiobook of The Christmas Stocking Murders, narrated by Tom Turner.
I must confess to having secretly enjoyed the year following my adventure last Christmas. Now that I'm safe and sound, that is. One became something of an overnight sensation, rather spoiled by the fact that due to the nature of the events so vital to national security, the press were unable to report the full details of my heroics. I suppose the mystique enables members of the public to insert their own story, likely much more alluring than the reality. While visiting a school, imparting sound advice to the children, I was asked by one young tyke if I'd been to the moon. I told him not to be ridiculous, and that such a feat is something for the cinema, not real life. But the young do have such fertile imaginations, bless them. The day we go to the moon, I'll eat my trilby. And I'll want proof, too, not just a piece of old rock. On this morning, I was feeling rather fragile following the CID Christmas do. I say do, but I rather think don't to be much more appropriate. The whole thing consisted of a few crates of beer and some shared fish suppers in the canteen. But one must make the best of it, whatever the venue. So yours truly took full advantage, being unable to remember much after around 8 o'clock on the evening in question. Still, that's what Christmas is for, isn't it? Goodwill to all. Secretly, though, nothing can obscure the fact that I'm dreading Christmas this year. The lingering image of my father and me, sitting round the table with a withered cape on, his festive fowl of choice, wearing cheap paper hats, drinking his elderflower wine, and feeling utterly miserable, is one I'd rather avoid. But for the life of me, I can't think what else to do.